Yeah, you guys, what's up? This is your girl Dragon. It's time for another live tutorial. We're going to be jumping into learning how to make a Zone Wars map with random loot and random locations. Again, this is a live tutorial, so there won't be any cutscenes. At any time you guys need to slow down, be sure to do so. And you can do that by just using the controls in the video once the video is fully complete. We're going to go through this. I'm going to show you guys the setup and what we have here. What we're going to first do is just to go through a play test, and then I'll show you guys all the settings, and then we'll run another play test. Okay, so let's first start with just getting you guys familiar with what devices you need to create this type of game, and then we can jump into that play test. Alright, so if you're going to build this type of game, you're going to need your player spawn pads. So here I have a set of 20 with one designated to team 1. And again, I'll be going through the settings here after the play test. You're going to need channel devices. I have one channel device for all my player spawn pads to track and send events upon player spawning. If players are selecting teams, you're going to need class selectors and team setting and inventory device for each team. I also have a score manager to reflect how many players are on the team every time a player joins a team. And I have a trigger in the back to limit the amount of players joining the team. So this is going to be, as you see up there, 2 max per team. So we want to make sure that no more than 2 players join, because this is going to be a duo zone war, so only 2 players per team. All right. So in addition to that, you're going to need mutator zones, and you're going to need a control one. So you're going to need one main control. This will control whether players can jump, shoot, and build. So you want that one to always be on and active. So you're going to have one of those. And then in addition to those, what's going to handle your teleportation is the rest of the mutator zones. You're going to need a mutator zone for each zone that you have. So for this tutorial, I have 4 zones, and you see 4 mutator zones here. All right. Next, you're going to need a random number generator device, and you're going to need enough triggers for each zone. So I have 4 zones, and you see here I have 4 triggers. And I have the billboards there just so it's easier to keep track, okay? And then we need item granters as well. 1 for each slot if you're going to randomize this way. And you want to make sure you have heals if you want that as well. You want to have a different set for each zone, and you can see I have them separated here, and they're going to be randomized upon an event being sent by a channel device and a timer. You're also going to need a global team. So for that, you're going to need a separate class selector for global, team settings and inventory, and a class designer. As a bonus, you can add a tracker with an alkylate device to give the players some incentive for playing the game for a certain amount of time. So I'm going to show you guys how to set that up as well. And then this is just here for tutorial purposes. Now let's get to the zones. For this tutorial, I'm using advanced storm controller devices, 1 for each zone, as you see here. And then you're going to need beacons to set your phases. Now this zone will randomize every time it's generated. So it's never going to go the same place twice. So you only need as many beacons as many phases that you want. So I have 4 phases, and they're all going to randomize. I only need 4 beacons for that process, and I don't need any more than that because every time one of these activates, it's going to go based off of these beacons. Okay, so you don't need more beacons. For example, you don't need to put an advanced storm controller and then add beacons here and then add beacons here and then add beacons here, because that's going to cause the system to be a little bit more chaotic and you're going to have storms everywhere. Okay, so be sure that you have one advanced storm controller per zone. This is going to set your main phase, and then when you want it to randomize, then you're going to have your phases set with the beacons. And you'll see how that comes together once we check out the settings, once we're done with the test. Next, you're going to need teleporters, and this is going to teleport your players to the zones once the RNG device picks which zone for the game. And I hope I did not forget, but yes, you're going to need a timer. And this is going to basically allow your players to choose their teams. All right, so that's all the devices. And now that you know that, and you can get yourself prepared, let's go ahead and run a playtest. Okay, let's do it. All right, players spawn into the game and they're on global team, right? And they can pick any team. Let's go ahead, team 4, and you see the number increments. I'm not able to choose any other team because I've already picked a team and I can't choose those teams. I get my weapons and they're randomized. And we're going to go ahead and rate 2 minutes so you can see how the storm changes. So let's do it. Looks like we dropped in zone 3 this time. And for this tutorial, the zone sizes are pretty small. Once you know the settings, you're free to adjust the zones to however you like. Alright, once we reach 2 minutes, you're going to see that alkylate device grant. And this is going to phase 2. And there we go. Nice. Be sure to set your tracker for the time awards at a reasonable time amount. You don't want to do every 2 minutes. That's kind of spammy, but every 30 minutes is cool. Every 15 minutes. Just to keep players engaged. Keep in mind that the awards do not grant until your item or your island is collaborated. So make sure you're aware of that once you publish. Alright, so you see the storm is closing up. This is the last phase. There. So I set the storm not to hurt me since this is a tutorial. And we do have fall damage, which should be expected in the Zone Wars. Alright, so there you go. Let's go ahead and do one more round so you can see how the zones are randomized. And then we can check out the settings. All right, this time it'll be team 1. And just so you can see on the map how it looks, got pregame and all the zones here. All right, this time we're in zone 1. Got some cool loot. Another thing you can do with this type of game is add health power-ups throughout the map, or you can use the new stat counter device with the stat power-up to, you know, make special events. Oh, there we go. So you guys kind of get how that works there. All right, so let's go ahead and end the game. All right, keep in mind this tutorial does not include game end conditions. This is basically a setup tutorial just to get you on your way. You will have to set up game end conditions to complete the entire game. So I challenge you guys to do that, and I know you got this. Let's go ahead and jump into settings. So let's see, I'm going to see what would be the best way to start here. Again, since there's no cutscenes, I can't edit this out. So let's see. Let's start with spawning. So we're going to check out each spawn pad, and starting with the one designated to Team 1. And let's check it out. And you see this is connected to my channel device to transmit when the player is spawned. Alright, and you'll see that every other pad is the same. So what I'll do here is just show you this one, and then we'll check out the channel device, and you'll see how they're all linked to the channel device. The only difference is this one is designated to Team 1, and all the others are designated to Team Any. This is because, and you guys see I probably do this a lot in my tutorials, the first player that spawns into the game is always most likely going to be Team 1. And sometimes those players can help you send specific events that you need to happen throughout the game. So if you have devices that you need to enable and you know there's going to be like one player in the game, then you're going to go ahead and make sure that that player can set the whole premises of your game by sending events to the devices that need to be activated. So it's very helpful. Again, you don't have to do it that way, but it's really cool if you give it a shot. All right, so let's jump to the channel device and you can see what I mean. Now you see here are some spawn events that you can see that takes place when the players spawn into the game. The score manager will enable, and this is the score manager for each team. We got score manager team 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're also going to change player to team and class to the global team. So as soon as they spawn in, they're going to be changed to the global team. And then we're also going to enable the timer device, which is the timer device that's going to basically cycle through the item granters. That way the players can get a random item. All right. All right, so before we go ahead and proceed, let's go ahead and check out island settings, and then we'll go ahead and move on to the other devices. Let's check it out. Now there's some important things you have to take into consideration when setting up this type of game. I have it set to a max players of 20. Make sure this reflects the amount of players that you want in your game. Teams 100, and that's because I have 100 as my global team, and then I'm using teams 1 through 4. If you do it this way, this gives you enough room up to teams 99, depending on how many teams you want in your game. And then team size dynamic. All right, and this is because the devices will be setting the size of the team. Keep in mind, you never want to put, or you don't regularly want to put, let me just put it that way, teams custom and team size dynamic. And that is because if you can see here on the right hand side, combining custom teams with dynamic team size will prevent the island from working with matchmaking. So if you do want this island when you publish it to work with matchmaking, it is very important you do not put custom and dynamic here, okay? Make sure you designate the amount of teams you need, and then put team size dynamic if the devices are setting your teams. Again, all these are truly up to you, and you can customize from here. I would put manual respawning to no. Just for this type of game, you probably don't want that. All right, so those are all the settings under mode. I want to go back up and revisit this real quick. You want to make sure that last standing ends game is off and all teams must finish as no. That is because in this type of game you need to set your own game end conditions, and you might have some issues if you set this to yes and try to run your game. You might find that as soon as you start your game, it's going to end. So make sure last standing ends game is off and you are prepared to set your own game end conditions. All right. And then for a round, let's see here. Player. Again, this is all personal preference. You want building can destroy environment. This is up to you. I would put no, you don't want it to destroy environment. This is also important. Pickaxe destruction should be default. Environment damage should be player built only. Structure damage should be enemy and say self-built, right? And then let's go on to world. World is basically whatever you're doing with your game. It's fully up to you, what time of day, everything else like that, okay? And there's nothing specific for user interface. You can go ahead and, you know, do what you like there. All right, so let's see. That's island settings. So let's go ahead and jump into the timer, right? So this is your main timer device. And you can set it to however long you want. You want to give the players enough time to pick a team. If it's too fast, you're going to probably have some players stuck in the lobby, and that's not good. Or they might teleport because they haven't picked a team. And you know, it'll be, they won't, because this team, particularly this global team, they can't really do much. Like they can't build and everything, so they won't have what they need. So it's best that you give them enough time to pick a team. And for events on success, we're going to send an event to the random number generator to enable and to activate, and the mutator zone device control to enable, and then also the timer device to start. That's the timer that that's kind of cycles through all the weapons so that they can get a random lootout once it grants. Okay, now that you guys have that, let's go ahead and check out the system here set up for choosing teams. So I might have to bring one of these out. Now keep in mind, this system is the same for each team, but it's connected within itself, meaning for team one, these devices only speak for team one, the trigger, the score manager, this class selector, and this team settings and inventory, and so forth. You see they're all grouped together. So the settings for these are similar, with the exception that they're all coinciding for each team, if that makes sense. All right, so let's first start with the class selector device. We're going to be switching to a class of 1 and a team of 1. The activating team will be the global team, and this is important. That way, once they pick a team, they're switched to team 1. They won't be able to run and pick team 1 again, and they won't be able to run and pick team 2, 3, or 4. That way, once they pick a team, they're on that team, right? If you don't want that to happen, then you'll put activating team any, and if you do that and test it out, you'll see that they'll be able to run and choose that team multiple times, and that might be an issue if you don't want that to happen. All right, and you're going to see it's going to disable once it reaches 2. So once the trigger sends an event 2 times, the trigger is going to disable this class selector device when triggered. And then when the team is switched, we're going to send an event to the trigger team 1 limiter to trigger and the score manager to increment. And again, that's the score manager assigned to this team. All right, let's check out the trigger. And you see here it's going to transmit every 2 triggers. So the first time it triggers, it's not going to send an event, but the second time it triggers, it's going to send an event to disable this device. That way any more players than 2 won't be able to activate this device. That way it limits it to 2 players, right? So that's what's going to go on there. So you want to make sure you have that there. It's very important that it transmits every 2 triggers. So if you're going to have a limit of 4 players, you want it to transmit every 4 triggers, right? And then once it receives 4 counts, it's going to send an event to disable this class selector and nobody else can get on this team. Now once it reaches that limit of 2, so that it receives a trigger, that's what I'm trying to do. We're on functions now. We're going to trigger when receiving from class selector team 1 on team switch. So every time a player goes through here and they switch a team, it's going to send an event to the trigger. And we need 2 players to go here to have this trigger send an event. On trigger, it's an event to class selector team 1 to disable, and then it will disable the device. So that's practically the setup there. All right, the score manager for team 1. And it's going to increment every time a player runs through the class selector device for team 1. And that's when you see it increments by 1 and so forth. All right, and then team settings and inventory. Again, all this is personal preference. So if you want to do something different, you're going to set all these settings here to what you want. I did adjust this to a maximum equipment slots of 4. However, if you want it to have the full 5, just set it to don't override and you'll be good. All right, and let's go ahead and check out. I believe we did this, but I'll just go through it one more time. Yes, we did this already. Yeah. All right, so you'll see that this setting or the system here is exactly the same, except it's all for team 2, right? So I'm going to go ahead and show you team 2's setup, and then you should be able to basically copy pasta the system for team 3 and team 4 and make sure it's all set up the same. So let's start with the class selector for team 2. So you see class 2, team 2 is what they're going to be switching to, activating team 100. All right, so you see here I have some duplicates, and this is because I copy pasted this device and it has some remaining events from the copying. So let's go ahead and remove trigger 4 and trigger 3, right? This is only supposed to be for 2. So let's do that. And then you'll see we have on team switch an event to trigger team 2 limiter to trigger and score manager team 2 to increment. Okay? And then let's go to trigger 2 team limiter, and this is what we got. All right, score manager for team 2. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move that back. And team settings and inventory for team 2. All right, and go ahead and duplicate that for teams 3 and 4. Just make sure everything is speaking within the same system, okay? All right, I just want to double check here to, let's see, make sure there's nothing duplicated like the other. All right, and then this one should just be, yeah. All right, so here we want to add, looks like we don't have that here, so trigger for team 4, limiter to trigger. And then for this one, let's get that. Trigger for team 3. Limiter to trigger. All right, cool. All right, so that is that system here. Just make sure you guys duplicate the same thing that you've seen for team 1 and team 2, for teams 3 and 4. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and jump into the mutator zones. So you're going to have a control zone, and you'll see what this is doing here. This is always enabled, and it's set to the size of your pregame lobby. It's set to any team or class, and what it prevents is the editing and the building, right? It's okay if players jump in a pregame. That's cool if that's what you want, you know. And then you want to make sure weapon fire is off and building is off, because you don't want them doing that in the pregame. All right, so this is enabled when receiving from timer device on success, but since we have it set to enabled always, we're going to just take that off, right? So just remove that, and no functions, no events. Next we have each zone, mutator zone for each zone, right? So we got zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, and zone 4. When these zones are enabled, it's going to teleport all the players within this pregame to that zone. And it's enabled via the random number generator device. So let's go ahead and check it out. Enabled on phase, none. Make sure it's sized to the zone, to the size of your pregame lobby. And so however big you have your pregame zone, make sure it fits and all the players are able to be inside. All right, and then enable when receiving from, we got to have, let's see here. Do I have a duplicate? I do. I was like, whoa, what's that? There we go. Looks like we have a ghost duplicate here. See, the numbers are changing like that. Again, let's see, we are in UEFN. Looks like I have some ghost zones. Yep, I have some ghost zones. That's a bug. If you come across that, don't freak out. It's okay. What you got to do is make sure you don't delete the one you need, right? This one I don't need. This says 3, 4. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and update these because it looks like I deleted one that was my number 2. And again, make sure enable on phase none. And what we're going to do here is enable when receiving from the trigger device that's connected to zone 2 in the RNG device. So I have trigger zone 2, right? Untriggered. Make sure that takes. And then on player entering zone, teleport to zone 2. And this is zone 3. Alrighty. Enable from trigger zone 3, and on player entering zone, teleport to zone 3, teleport. Right, cool. And then we got zone 4. And enable trigger zone 4 on triggered, and then on player entering zone, teleporter zone 4, teleport. Right, there you go. All right, cool. Watch out for those ghost ones. Sometimes that happens. It's really weird, but you know, we'll get past it. Now let's take a look at the, let's do let's do this because then that should be like the last thing I think. Let's get to the mech room, right? So random number generator, because that's going to start as soon as that timer, the main timer goes down. If it looks like this, don't worry, it's just a bug. Just go ahead and grab it, redrop it, you should be good, right? See how it fixes itself? Nice, all right, cool. So let's go ahead and take a look at the settings for this. So I have 4 zones, value limit 1 is 1, value limit 2 is 4, winning value is 0, roll time is 2 seconds. You can put however long you want it to take. But let's reduce it to 1 second. And that's cool. And you can see the rest of the settings there. All right, as far as functions, enable when receiving from timer device, that's the main game timer on success, and activate when receiving from timer device as well. So we want to enable it and then activate it. That way it'll start rolling, and there's no events, so don't worry about that. Each section has a trigger that represents each zone. So let's take a look at zone 1, and this is trigger zone 1. What's important here, you want to make sure that it is triggered by sequencers. So that's very important. Transmit every 1 time. But this right here, you want to make sure it is set to on, okay? And then on triggered, we're going to be doing a lot of stuff here. We're going to be granting items and enabling mutator zones. So this is the item granter set for zone 1. We're going to enable item granter and grant as well. Cycle, enable, grant, mutator zone 1, mutator zone device zone 1, enable, item granter H4, enable, grant, enable W3, grant, and we're also going to generate the storm, right? The storm for zone 1. So advanced storm controller zone 1 generate storm. All right, so let's take a look at the item granters. You can see there's separate sets for each zone. They all have the same items, but they're randomized, so players get different weapons. All right, so let's check out item granter W1. Enable when receiving from trigger zone 1, untriggered. Grant item when receiving from trigger zone 1, untriggered. Cycle when, let's see, when receiving from item granter W1 on item granted. Trigger zone 1 untriggered, and channel cycler on receive transmit. So you may be wondering, why am I cycling it so much? I want it to randomize completely. So these events are sending basically a signal to this item granter to rotate to the next item, or to a random item upon those events. Now this granter has the same settings. As you can see, the functions are the same. It is missing one, so you can see it still works even if you don't have all three. And this is just an example. It will still work if you don't want it to, if you don't want to do that. Okay, just give it a try, give it a test, and see how it works for you. And again, on item granted, we're going to cycle randomly, and you can see they're all kind of the same here. And let's go to functions, and you see this one's just on the channel cycler, right? And I'll show you guys this one, this set, and you'll see it's exactly the same as far as how it cycles and grants, with the exception that it's connected to zone 2's trigger instead of being connected to zone 1's trigger, right? So let's check it out. All right, so you want to make sure you copy this process for the remaining zones and you'll be good, okay? Next, let's go ahead and take a look at the channel cycler and timer device 2, which is connected to the channel cycler. So first let's do timer device 2. And you can just rename it, cycling timer or the timer device cycler. That would be good. You want to make sure it restarts as well because every time it completes, it's going to send an event to the channel device to cycle all the item granters. This will not start until the main timer device in the pregame is successful, and then looks like we have enable when receiving from spawn events that should be already binded, and then on success we're going to send event to channel cycler to transmit. All right, so again, if you've done this from the beginning, you'll see that when you come to this device, this is already binded via the channel spawn events enable when receiving from. Okay, now let's check out channel cycler, and I have a global broadcast name there, transmit receiving from timer device 2, and you'll see here each item granter we're cycling to random item. So if you set it up through your item granter, it should already be binded here. If you haven't, then you can go ahead and bind them right here, and that will connect to your item granter. So make sure you have all of them in line. If you're on UEFN, it's a lot quicker to do that. If you're in Fortnite 1.0, just give it some time and you can just add one at a time. All right, let's go ahead into global teams. And this is connected to the spawn events to connect the players and change the players to the global teams when they spawn in. So let's see here. You got class 100 and team 100. And functions change player to team and class when receiving from channel PG spawn events, and so forth. Here you want to configure this global team by using a team settings and inventory device and a class designer. All right, and then the class designer. Again, this is for the global team and class. I do have this on only for tutorial purposes. Make sure you don't have player flight on when you have or you're trying to publish a game that you want to be active, unless that's what you want. All right, cool. And there's no functions, there's no events. Right, now let's check out the tracker. This tracker is assigned when the game starts, and it allows you to award your players an accolade depending on how much time has elapsed in the game. So you want to make sure the stat track is set to playtime elapsed, and target value is going to be however long you want it to be. I showed you in the tutorial, we set it to 2 minutes. Keep in mind that each increment represents minutes. So if you want to do 30 minutes, you'll set it to 30, 15, 15, 10, and so forth. Right, so let's go ahead and set it back to 2 for tutorial purposes. And let's see here. You want to make sure you put your title and your description text. And when complete, we're going to enable the accolade and award. All right, and that's it for that. On the accolade, you want to make sure you set how much you want to reward. You can also set a name to be displayed on the screen when it does provide a reward, and so forth. And these should be already binded. All right, cool. All right, now we're getting to the last portion, and that is the zones. All right, so for each zone, I have advanced storm controllers. So let's go ahead and check it out. Now you see the phase 1 radius is 50 and the bounds radius is 50. And you can see how big that radius is when the game starts. Make sure that you set it to a radius that you want. This tutorial radius may not fit what you're building, or it may be, maybe too big, it may be too small. Just make sure you adjust those numbers to something that works for you. This is going to generate a storm and receiving from trigger zone 1 untriggered. There you go. And now for storm 2. And you can see these are practically the same, with the exception that it's connected to the zone that it's in. So this is going to generate a storm when receiving from trigger zone 2 for zone 2. And this is trigger zone 3 for zone 3. And again, I have each radius being the same. And trigger zone 4 for zone 4. Next, the beacons. So you see I have 4 beacons representing 4 different phases of my Zone Wars game. Again, you only need 1 set of beacons, all set to random. So let me go ahead and show you the settings. We have Advanced Storm Beacon Phase 1. Set your resize time, your radius, and make sure the movement behavior is set to move randomly. Okay, and this is what all options look like, so you can take a look at that. Again, I have damage level to none because this is a tutorial, but when you want the game to provide that damage, make sure you place that there if you want anything different, and so forth. Every zone is the same, with the exception that it's going to be reflecting each phase that it's for. So this is phase 2. This is phase 3. And this is phase 4. Okay. Last, I do want to bring to your attention, I totally kind of glossed over that. Storm sickness. Right now the storm sickness is off because it's a tutorial, but in a live game you want to set this to on, right? That way when players are in the storm, their health will go down. And then in contrast to that, you can set the amount of damage you want that storm to provide to the player. So let's say from phase 1 you want it to be weaker, you'll keep it at a damage of probably 1%. And then if you want the damage to get stronger, then by like phase 3, you want to, increase that to 10% and then this to like 20 or 30%, okay? Last, we have the teleporters. So I have teleporter zone 1. And for tutorial purposes, the rift is visible in effects. You can turn that off if you don't want that. And then functions, teleport when receiving from mutator zone device zone 1 on player entering zone. And that's it, right? And then, of course, for teleporter 2, it's going to be the same with the exception that it's teleporting when receiving from mutator zone 2 on player entering zone. Teleporter zone 3, mutator zone 3. Teleport when receiving from when player entering zone. So you see that there. Again, teleport when receiving from mutator zone 3 on player entering zone. And last, we have the teleporter for zone 4. Teleport when receiving from mutator zone 4 on player entering zone. Right, and that is your setup for this type of game. It is really cool. Let's go ahead and run the last playtest. And this is a simple setup. I hope you find it useful. You can take a look at the map here. And let's see what zone we're going to be teleported to this time. Zone 1. All right. Cool. And then let's go ahead and end it and then try another one. Zone 3. Cool, right? All right, that's how you do it. Let me go ahead and end the game. I do hope you find this tutorial beneficial. Again, this is a live tutorial, so there's no edits or nothing like that. So I do hope it helps. In addition to that, if you guys do have any additional questions, be sure to jump into the Creative Block Discord. Be more than happy to assist when available. And I can't wait to see what you guys make. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.